The member for Memramcook Centre-Mar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am rising today at second reading of Bill 70, an act to amend the Beverage Containers Act. And certainly, there needs to be change with how we manage waste and recycling and all of these things in New Brunswick. At a societal level, we have frankly done a terrible job at dealing with the different products that are produced, and sometimes it's byproducts, sometimes it's actual garbage. And I'd say over the recent centuries and recent decades, we've really created a lot of problems, a lot of waste. And I think it's important to understand the history of recycling and the history of where the responsibility lies. And huge corporations, and we're talking really big, billion-dollar corporations, really lobbied governments to ensure that the responsibility and the cost for recycling that these products that they were producing was downloaded onto governments and onto individual consumers. And so this idea of recycling, that we're each responsible and we need to make sure we throw our bottle in the recycling bin, sure, but the responsibility and the cost has been downloaded onto us. But it's huge corporations that they're really responsible and have figured out the psychology of how to make certain drinks addictive, have considered have really focused on moving towards plastic and for their bottles. All of these things have shied away from reusable containers. And so what I'm going to be looking for in committee and in this legislation is how can we ensure that it's not small businesses and individuals who are ultimately responsible and bearing the cost of recycling and the environmental responsibility, but that it's put onto corporations as much as possible. And so I want to also give context that these bills are introduced and about 24 hours later we're doing second reading. And so that also means that as opposition members we have just started to be able to dig in, so we will be able to dig in more in committee. But that is a concern. Is this downloading cost onto smaller businesses? And I think the other thing is to look at the big picture of what we're trying to do. Can we have more reusable containers? Can we even look at more uniform containers being used so they're easier to reuse and to recycle? When you go to stores, you see not just beverage containers, you see hundreds of thousands of different types of containers, and it becomes impossible. Like in my community, it's impossible for it's not impossible, it's not being done. We're not recycling glass properly. People have to take all their glass and go drive it to a container, and that's an improvement on what was happening. So we need to make sure that each individual household is not having to take responsibility. We need to make some systemic changes to make it easier for people, to make the system work better, to not download costs and download responsibility to an individual level, because that's the problem when it comes to environmental issues. For decades and decades we've said each one of you is responsible, but it's really we need to be looking at the corporations and at the systems. So that's what I'm going to be looking for when we are addressing this at committee, and I look forward to that. Thank you for the time, Mr. Speaker.